the scientists who came from the dark. The war had ended, but the world was still trembling. In 1945, as the smoke cleared over Berlin and the ashes of Auschwitz settled into history's conscience, the United States and the Soviet Union both looked toward a new kind of battlefield, one fought not with bullets or trenches, but with intelligence, technology, and science. From that quiet, invisible front came a story so morally tangled that America itself would spend decades avoiding it. It was called Operation Paperclip, a secret program to recruit hundreds of German scientists, engineers, and technicians from the defeated Nazi regime, and bring them to the United States. Their expertise, once used to build Hitler's war machine, would now serve Washington's new enemy, Moscow. The logic was simple, cold, and brutal. If America didn't take them, the Soviets would. The dawn of the Cold War demanded minds that could launch rockets, split atoms, and guide missiles across oceans. Morality, suddenly, was a luxury. The harvest of defeat. In the ruins of Europe, U.S. Army intelligence officers operating under the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, began scouring Germany for scientists before the Soviets could find them. Their mission was called Operation Overcast, later renamed Paperclip, because each selected scientist's file was marked with a paperclip. Men who had once pledged loyalty to the Third Reich, men who had worn SS uniforms or worked directly under Himmler, were quietly given new identities, new homes, and new jobs in America. Their Nazi pasts were scrubbed or softened by intelligence officers who understood one truth: in the new age of rockets and nuclear fear, America's future would depend on men who had built Hitler's bombs. At the center of this strange exodus was Wernher von Braun, a brilliant engineer who had designed the V-2 rocket that terrorized London during World War II. His rockets killed thousands, built by the hands of slave laborers in underground concentration camps. Yet now, as Europe starved, von Braun and his team were treated as prizes of war. When U.S. agents found him, he surrendered willingly, aware that the Americans were the only ones who could give him a future. "We knew that we had created a new means of warfare," von Braun once admitted. "And we wanted to see it used for peace." That line, spoken years later, would echo with a certain irony, because peace would soon mean building weapons capable of ending humanity itself. From Piedmont to the Pentagon. By 1946, over 1,600 scientists had been brought to the United States. They were housed in military bases like Fort Bliss, Texas, and White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico, where they resumed their work, this time under the American flag. Their job was simple: help the U.S. Army develop missile systems that could outpace Soviet advances. Many of them worked under military supervision, but others were soon absorbed into American institutions, NASA, the Air Force, and defense contractors. Von Braun became the most famous of them all. In the 1950s, he became the face of the U.S. space program, a smiling German engineer who appeared on television explaining rocket science to American children. He spoke of Mars and the Moon, of humanity's future among the stars. Few mentioned the dead laborers buried in the tunnels of Middlework, the underground factory where his rockets had once been built. It was a carefully managed story, the story America needed. The space race was beginning, and moral contradictions were inconvenient. The ethical abyss. Not everyone in Washington agreed with the operation. Some officers were disgusted by the idea of granting amnesty to men with blood on their hands. The Justice Department, for instance, raised concerns about the war crimes records of several recruits. But the military's argument always won: America's survival depended on these minds. The CIA and the Pentagon classified the scientists' files, erasing the darkest chapters of their biographies. By 1948, the ethical debate had been quietly buried under national security. The Cold War was heating up. Stalin had detonated his first atomic bomb. The Korean peninsula was on fire. And in the skies above, both superpowers were racing to dominate the final frontier. As the arms race spiraled, the scientists of Paperclip gave the United States a decisive edge. Their innovations led to the development of the Redstone missile, the Saturn V rocket, and the early foundations of the American space program. When NASA was created in 1958, von Braun became one of its leading figures. A decade later, his Saturn V would carry Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the moon. The world celebrated it as a triumph of American ingenuity. Few remembered that the rocket's grandfather had once borne the swastika. Secrets in the shadows. As the decades passed, whispers of Operation Paperclip began to surface. Journalists and historians discovered that many of these scientists had been deeply complicit in Nazi crimes. Some had conducted experiments on prisoners. Others had designed weapons used in genocide. In 1985, the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Special Investigations opened investigations into several of them. But by then, most were old men living quietly in American suburbs, their reputations long sanctified by Cold War heroism. The truth was uncomfortable: America had won the space race, in part, by making peace with evil. Even the name paperclip came to symbolize something larger: the way morality can be bent, clipped, or pinned out of sight when national interest demands it. The legacy. To this day, Operation Paperclip remains one of the most haunting paradoxes of American history. It gave birth to both the U.S. space program and the modern military-industrial complex. It fueled American pride and seeded moral doubt. The same rockets that carried astronauts into space also carried nuclear warheads across continents. The same engineers who built machines of death for Hitler now designed the ships of exploration that carried humanity beyond Earth. In a sense, Operation Paperclip was not just about scientists, it was about America's soul, about the choices a nation makes when victory requires compromise. The program ended quietly by the late 1950s, its files buried deep in archives. But its ghosts remain visible every time a rocket lifts off from Cape Canaveral, every time humanity looks toward the stars. Because the story of Operation Paperclip is also the story of the 20th century itself: brilliant, ambitious, and morally fractured. It is the story of how the world learned to live with its own contradictions. And how, in the ruins of war, the line between right and wrong became as blurred as a contrail against the morning sky.